Hey, what's going on? It's Rico from the Made in China podcast and Source Find Asia. In this episode, I had the privilege of talking to Andy Church, and the topic was, do contracts matter in China? I think this is a topic that is highly debated when it comes to doing business in China. It's like, does it matter? You know, what kind of language should be in the contract? What kind of contract should you have in place? I actually wrote an article for Enter China. It's called Do Contracts Matter in China? Of course, I'll link it up in the show notes. But yeah, I just think that it's kind of like the answer is yes, but it's also no. And we kind of dive into the reasons, and I also explain those reasons quite in depth with my article. But going back to Andy Church, he's a really great guy, just good guy in general. Not only very, very knowledgeable, having been doing business in China for over, I think now 15 years. Having first come down in 2002. He just one of the conversations I had with Andy way back in around the Canton Fair in October last year was just like, when he joined Enter China, he's an Enter China member as well. I just asked him like, oh, so why did you join? He said, I just wanted to give back. Like, I really have been lucky. He's really been lucky, as he put it, to have mentors around him when he was first coming up, and he just wanted to give that value back. So hopefully we have Andy on as a regular guest. He runs Inside Quality. It's a sourcing but mainly QC service company, and so he's not a direct competitor because he services, I guess, larger corporations, whereas I tend to focus on small to medium sized or new entrepreneurs. So yep, I think the episode was great. I think the conversation was great. I learned from him. And I hope you guys learn whether contracts matter in China. And what's your opinion? You know, you should send us a message. Let us know if you think contracts matter in China or not. That being said, I have another announcement. I'm going to do this every week. We're looking for an summer intern at SFA. Listen, man, I'm jealous of whoever gets the chance to work for us. Like, we've scaled up so quickly over the past 2 years. Being able to fly to China, work in a company like this with a CEO who's only a few years older than them, kind of understands. I remember what it was like for me 2 years ago coming down to China, just over 2 years ago now. And I mean, just the opportunities, being part of the Enter China community, like, being friends with people like Nick, like going to the Brink offices in Hong Kong, they've raised, it's an 8-figure business. They've raised millions and millions of dollars for IoT startups. And it's just like, besides that, I mean, within the Enter China community, we have so many people doing cool things with FPA, with crowdfunding, with just, generally designing and making physical products. Like Bamboodi made like a MacBook skin and had a line for Gary Vaynerchuk. It's like, there's just a cool group that I'm connected to. And then beyond that, just learning how to make things, sourcing, visiting factories, dealing with China days, dealing with hashtag This Is China moments, and like all the funny moments that happen in the office, outside of the office, in general China life. I feel like it would be a great opportunity for anybody that's ambitious. I don't care about qualifications. Of course, I mean, they always look nice on paper or whatever, but I care more about the person, what they're interested in, what their abilities are, ambition, detail oriented, like things like that. So anyways, if you're interested in applying, just shoot me your resume and a quick intro to info@sourcefindasia.com. Without further ado, here's the episode.
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Yeah, Andy, thanks for being on the podcast. It's been a long time coming. We've had a lot of issues, but I'm so happy that you were, patient and we finally been able to put this together.
Well, totally understand. That's one of the issues of doing business with in China, and I'm glad that we're able to finally connect.
Speaking of issues doing business in China, it was a perfect segue to the topic of the podcast, which is, do contracts matter in China? So I actually wrote an extensive article for Enter China about, it was called "Do Contracts Matter in China?" And Andy is a member, and he's very, very experienced and very helpful. And I actually crowdsourced some information from Andy, from Kenny, from China Mike. I just sort of got different opinions on whether contracts matter. I think that what I found interesting about talking to people in different fields with different levels of experience, different, experiences in China and different lengths, being in China for different lengths of time, was that there were a lot of parallels, but I think there are also quite a few differences, especially my recent experiences. I've only been doing business here for about 2 years, but my recent experiences have informed me in a different way than I think a lot of you guys. So I just kind of wanted to have sort of a more open conversation and, see where we differ or where we agree. I think it's 90% agreement, but I just wanted to have a talk about that and have it be a learning experience for the listeners.
I totally agree. I think that I read your article a while back, and in discussions with my peers and customers, that contracts are important, but many of us have different reasons of why we use them, not only in China, but also in the U.S. and in the West. A prime example is NDA. Oftentimes, people have the theory that an NDA is just like a handshake. I mean, you either trust somebody or you don't, and an NDA isn't going to be a catch-all if somebody discloses information you shared with them. They're hard to enforce, but they are a step in cementing a relationship or showing that you're serious about moving forward.
Definitely. Yeah, I think the NDA it's an interesting one. I feel like, in my opinion, like with most of the contracts, when I have a factory sign an NDA, I'm not necessarily expecting them to honor it, but I do feel like it is a little bit of a deterrent. And then they feel uncomfortable, especially if you're still doing business with them. I think if you stop doing business with them, or you haven't spoken to them in 6 months or something like that, then they might breach the contract. But if you're continuously, working with them and placing orders, then, most of the time they'll honor it. Or like what happened to me recently with one of my clients, they listed her design on their website, and she just happened to be going through the website looking for new ideas and new products, and then she sees her design, and it was add to cart. It was like ready to be sold. And so she contacted me, and then I contacted the supplier, and we had an email thread, and we just reminded them that, hey, you did sign this NDA, and we're working with you guys, and it seems kind of strange that you'd put this up on your website. And they came back and said, oh, well, we completely forgot that this was not, the new sales manager or whatever put it up and didn't realize that it was not our design, and we'll take it down immediately.
Interesting. I haven't it's the same, but online, but I have a similar parallel in that I've gone into a factory showroom and seen our customers' products, which is never good. And so, yeah, it's not a good way for a factory to show customer how valuable they are.
I'm interested, from when was the first time you started dealing with contracts in China, and what was like your opinion then versus now? Has it changed? Is it still the same? Could you talk a little bit more about your history with doing deals in China?
But my first experience with contracts in China was peripherally with customers of ours. I was with a third party quality assurance testing and lab and quality service provider, and our customers, one having contracts with us, but also working with the factories and being a part of the contractual agreements with testing with them. So that was the first experience many years ago, back in like 2002, 2003, when contracts were not as much in use as they are today. The first contract that I've been involved with directly was about 5 years ago as we evolved into starting my business and was in a sourcing business and starting to work with the factories to put contracts in place, both NDAs, non-circumventation, non-circumvent contracts. Those were the beginnings. And then now we do contracts with all the factories that we deal with.
Have you had any situations where you had to like reinforce a contract, or any situation where the supplier broke it, or you had a disagreement and you had to kind of negotiate?
We have had issues that were as a result of deviation or breaking a clause in a contract. We have not, fortunately, had to go to the Chinese courts or U.S. courts for enforcing. I think that it's important to, when you have contracts with a Chinese factory, understanding where the governing law is going to be. And if you're executing a contract with a Chinese factory and you expect that you're going to have remedy in your home country, and for me that is in the U.S., most of my clients, that's going to be very difficult to enforce. So on the flip side, if you want to have a contract that is enforceable with a Chinese entity, then that governing law is going to be China, and the contract language must be in Chinese. So even before having that first contract draft, it's important for the party who wants the contract to be signed with a Chinese factory or supplier to understand that basic, because that's going to drive a lot of what's included, what the language is. Jurisdiction is going to be the foundation of moving forward.
Yeah, and then I mean beyond that, even just 9 times out of 10, it's not worth enforcing because you're at a disadvantage being the Laowai in China, and then just the amount of money that you might spend on legal fees is it might not be worth your time.
Correct. And to go back to, I think part of what you were asking was, have we had issues and have we had to negotiate? So, and then I explained that we have had issues, but didn't elaborate on that. So we have had issues with factories and the contractual agreement with them. Fortunately, we haven't had to go to court, but we have had to negotiate with them. And in most cases, it has continued to allow for a continued relationship with the factory. So it was a negotiation that was mutually agreeable. But we have had a couple instances where that's not been the case, and it's never good, because when you spend the energy and resource to find a supplier, to end it on a note that is not good for either party isn't an easy thing to do. It's costly to everybody. So not everything ends on a happy note.
What in your opinion, or in your experience, what do you think are the most common things that get breached in a contract or sales agreement? And by the way, when I say contract, most of the time I'm talking about a sales agreement. Of course, there's NDA and you mentioned NNN, but most of the time it's going to be the sales agreement. So in your experience, what do you think gets breached? What is the most common aspect of a sales agreement that gets breached?
Well, so as part of our sales agreement, we also include, not disclosure and not to be listed product in sales rooms or online shared with others. So that is, in my experience, probably the most common breach. Secondly, I haven't seen your sales agreement, so if you include specifications or timelines of delivery, which often is your sales agreement, Rico, like part of your purchase order that you issue to the factory in each order, or what does it include?
Our sales agreement, have you seen the sales agreement that's circulating in the inter-China community? I don't know if you've seen it, but
no, I can't. I haven't looked at it.
It's in English, but we always have ours translated as well. But it does encapsulate an NDA, but a lot of times we sign the NDA as part of our initial vetting process. So there's a little bit more language in the NDA that we use, and then the sales agreement talks about not being able to use our designs and such. But then I also have a lot of clients that are just doing OEM products, and they're using the factory's design. So in those situations, we obviously don't have NDAs. We do include specifications. We include obviously the cost and the delivery date or expected delivery date and quality expectations. I mean, that's your forte, but yeah, we include that we're going to do a during production inspection, end of production inspection, FRI, and what the tolerances are, what AQL level we're going to use, and then we also include what happens if the production fails inspection. What happens? Do they replace it? Do they fix the problems and stuff like that? So we have those kind of details in our sales agreements.
Okay, so I mean, that's a contract that's similar to what we some of our clients sign with factories annually, and we don't do that on each PO or a sales agreement. So it's similar, and I would go back to the things that breach most often are not meeting time commitments and delivery time commitments. From quality, that's by inspections and testing are vital. So those are the things that are most often breached. And in continuing relationship with the factory, as part of that discussion, quote unquote negotiation, it needs to be very clear that those things aren't tolerable. And going back to my early comment, there's a lot of energy and resource in finding a supplier. So if you have other things that are running well, for example, communication, they are fast turnaround on providing samples, machine samples, and then they have delivery issues. Working with that factory to address the delivery issues so you can salvage that relationship is going to be a much favorable outcome for everybody rather than trying to enforce a contract that stipulates that for every week that a shipment is late, there's a 2% penalty or a monetary fine or something, because that isn't going to make up for lost sales. In my case, most of my customers have just-in-time deliveries to retailers, and if you miss your delivery spot, a 2% on a PO isn't going to be a remedy to on the other side. So it's important that if you have purchase orders or that have different criteria than an annual sales agreement or annual purchasing contract with a factory. For example, a purchase order that may have tighter inspections or include pre-production inspection, inline inspections, or tighter AQLs, that be very clearly communicated with the factory.
Yep. No, I 100% agree. I think that as you said at the beginning of that was like Kenny's talked about it. I talked about it in the article. It sets the expectation. It sets expectation. Them being able to sit down and you being able to sit down with them and say, hey, we're expecting this level of quality. We're expecting this to be done at this time. But it's definitely not ironclad. The one of the things that I brought up in my article that I thought was different from everything that everybody else was saying is that I've been dealing with one or two suppliers that especially in southern China, who were very much worried about the contract and very much worried about producing the products late and, the late fees that were involved. And actually we had one factory that, honored the late fee that we had, and it was a couple $1,000. I think it was about $1,000, and I saw that and I was like, I think the times they are changing, and I think that some suppliers are beginning to try to be as professional as possible and adhere to sort of global standards. And I think as well, just that the Chinese government itself is putting in strategic policies and stuff to try to change the view of China in the global market.
Yeah, I agree. And missing ship windows or shipping timelines that are specified in the contract are very important. It affects the factory's client because they're often selling to retailers or delivering to other distributors who have timeline delivery commitments as well. So if there's timing issues, the time to address those is not when the product is supposed to be loaded up on a truck and shipped to the port. It's at the very beginning. So contracts are a tool. It can be a tool to, in this case, missing ship windows or delivery timelines and whatnot, to address quality issues, production issues. They're usually an indication of other problems. So, one time maybe, there's what's the phrase? First time, shame on me. Second time, shame on you. First time, shame on you. Second time, shame on me. So the first time missed deliveries happen, then that needs to be a learning tool. Too often we look at, well, the contract said, right, the contract said, and a fine is going to leave a bitter taste in the factory's mouth. Maybe the sales contact or customer service person you're dealing with at the factory is going to get fined, right or wrong. That's another discussion. But, they're not going to be happy about that either. So maybe the first time something that is specified in the contract there's a deviation from, it wasn't that criteria wasn't met, that is used as a learning tool, training tool to address it going forward. But you also don't want to get in the habit of always just providing forgiveness and no penalty if one's spelled out. But it needs to be on a case by case kind of basis, and also realistic. I mean, going to my point, and I don't want to be a broken record, but we spent a lot of time developing and finding these suppliers, and so if something can be salvaged, that relationship can be salvaged, you want to take the necessary steps to do so. And finding somebody on the first time they missed a ship window may not be, unless it's a one-time off thing and it was a very large order. So like I said, again, it goes to a case-by-case review of what the issues are.
That is a very, very good point you brought up there in terms of the amount of time that you spend researching and developing these relationships. And that reminds me of something that Kenny said in the article, which was that at some stage, if you build up the relationship becomes a contract. And it's almost the fact that they're scared or you're scared of losing that relationship or damaging that relationship. And then that becomes something that forces them to either meet deadlines or treat you a certain type of way in China, which I thought was, a very interesting point, because I have been dealing with a few suppliers for over a year and a half now, but I haven't gotten to a stage like what Kenny was talking about, where he's been, working with the same supplier for 5+ years, and he doesn't even sign contracts with that supplier at this stage.
Well, I think that's differing. We have a differing opinion there.
Yep.
And that simply in the respect that simply having a long-term relationship with a factory does not necessitate the need to have a contract. That is what I disagree with. I think that his comments about the relationship is as much of a contract as the actual contract of itself is very important. Mm-hmm. But if you run into issues, especially with if you have a long-standing relationship with a factory, years, you have a very viable business. I mean, you're selling lots of product because you're, with the assumption that these are repeat orders throughout the year, not just a one-off. But even if they are, if something happens, you need to have a recourse.
Yeah.
So I'm in the quality industry, and a large part of our business is managing our clients'
expectations,
quality, and testing.
I'm joking.
What'd you say?
I said expectations.
Expectations, right?
That's my job.
I just came back from ICL conference, which is the International Consumer Product and Health Safety Organization, and we have all 4 of the 5 CPSC commissioners were there. And if anybody listening to this does not know what the CPSC is, shame on you, because if you sell any product into the United States, the governmental agency that regulates quality around those products is the Consumer Product Safety Commission. Yeah. And so we had the new acting chairman, the previous 2 chairmen ago was there. And so there's a big focus on safety. And I do have a point in my long, here, is that if you don't have a contract in place because you have had a relationship with a factory for years, and you run into a situation where there's a recall, you're not going to get any help or any recourse with that factory if you don't have a current contract. And nobody wants a recall, but they exist every day, every week, not necessarily every day, but every week there's emails from the CPSC with what's recalled.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess
earlier there was a Yamaha $15,000 Yamaha piano that was recalled for lead paint, in one inaccessible area, really. And so, and there was only 900 units sold, and here, this is like going back to the days of the Mattel when they were the forerunner of the quality industry. And, these are companies who have long time standing relationships with their factories, and one, I don't know, it could have been just a few gallons of paint that was used in this one area.
And then sometimes it's not even the factory. It might have been the factory supplier that took a shortcut or, made a mistake.
So these contracts are as important as the information in a purchase order because they set expectations. They detail out what is required by the factory. And so all this time is spent vetting factories, working with them to create samples, and oftentimes there's more time spent back and forth on quoting than any thought of having a contract. And I'm sure you have customers who, don't feel the need to have contracts with their factories when you're acting, and so I have differing opinions.
Yeah, and I always insist that they do, even if they don't have too much language they want to put into it, that we have a template for them to kind of work off of. And it's just like I try to make it as easy as possible for them to fill in their information, and then the other stuff is the most basic quality standards that I always try to check for with suppliers.
And the contract cements the relationship. We've talked about when there's issues and negotiations and setting the expectations, but it's also important to know, and I think we'll give credit again to Kenny, in that it cements the relationship. It shows the factory you're serious, and this is when I believe it is important, more important at the beginning of a relationship with the factory and you're first vetting them, or maybe you, as part of the vetting process, and you sign an NDA. It shows a level of
professionalism,
legitimacy when reaching out to a factory and say, we're interested. We found you based on our research that we think you can you make the products or similar products to what we're interested in producing. But to go forward, we really want you to have to execute this NDA. And so that shows that can show the factory that you're serious in pursuing discussions with them and how they help. So there's different levels of contractual agreements with the factory, and the NDA should be one that is executed at the very beginning of discussions with the factory, because it's just a simple, straightforward contract that it's a confidentiality agreement.
Yeah, I have two points going off of that. So just to clarify, I think I'm not sure what Kenny meant when he said he doesn't sign contracts, because he did also specify that he always has some sort of written statement with his quality expectations and like the product description and deadlines and per unit cost. And he said he definitely makes sure that the factory boss signs off on that, because he made a point about if you don't have anything written in place, it becomes your word versus the salesperson's point if something does come up, right? So I'm not sure what he means by not necessarily signing a contract. Maybe his is just a little bit simpler than what we're discussing, or maybe his idea of what we meant by contract is different. I would love to get Kenny on the podcast to clarify, but.
Yes, maybe he doesn't execute a formal sales agreement like you mentioned earlier, which I just opened ours at the title of sales agreement. So I apologize earlier. It was maybe too early in the morning, and I wasn't thinking. Our contract is titled sales agreement. I
don't know what was the second point I was going to make.
Oh, we were talking about NDAs and just that at the beginning of a
Legitimacy.
relationship, it's important that
I was the second point I was going to make is on what you said in terms of legitimacy and professionalism, and it is a very telling thing for me as a consulting. As a manufacturing consulting firm, when we go to a factory and say, okay, the customer likes your product, they like the samples, here is our sales agreement and here are the details, and this is what we're expecting, and then they go, oh no, we can't sign that, or or even with an NDA, and then they just completely freak out or say, oh no, this is too formal or whatever, and it's like, yeah, this is definitely not the kind of supplier I want to be working with if they're not even willing to sign a simple sales agreement with. It's not like the expectations of the customer were crazy. They just expected them to produce the same level as the sample that they provided to us. So, it is a very telling thing when, not just from the factory's perspective, seeing that you are professional, but also as the buyer, seeing that your supplier is professional.
So I think that one aspect that we have not talked about, and I recollect that we talked about, was that the contract for email and paper copy, it needs to be sat down and reviewed with the factory point by point, because there's a lot of information, and if it's not gone over with the factory in a meeting, ideally in a meeting, then there shouldn't really be any expectation that the factory knows what they're signing.
Hey, what's up, guys? Just want to make a quick announcement here. This is Rico. We are hiring. We're looking for summer interns in SFA. If you guys are interested in having the experience of your life, moving over to China for a few months, learning how to make cool things, traveling around Southeast Asia, specifically China, of course, but China's Guangzhou is located in a way where we're like an hour away from Thailand and Bali and all this kind of stuff, and just hanging out with me as well. Go to our website, sourceoneasia.com/intern. I'll link it up in the show notes, and submit your application. What advice would you give to somebody who doesn't have the capital to hire an agent, and then they don't want to, maybe they're working or something like that, and they don't have the time to fly to China, but they want to put in a solid sales agreement? Would you recommend that I guess you wouldn't recommend that they hop on a Skype call because of all the issues that we've had.
But definitely, so if somebody, and given who the focus of our audience is, that is different than that audience being different than some of the clients that you and I deal with, that is a real practicality in that having a face-to-face meeting may not be feasible. So I would certainly suggest that having a call with the factory salesperson would be one way, and probably the best way. So then that leads the factory to the issue if the factory does not have somebody who can have a good, lengthy phone call in the buyer's native language. English is most common, but there's people, there's factories who have French and German capabilities and whatnot. So that if the phone call isn't feasible, an alternative, and not using a third-party resource such as you or me or in our businesses or another agent, when I guess would be, you would have to rely on email and stressing that you'd like them to come back with any concerns or clarify in their own language, in their own written email, their understanding of what the contract entails. And that could be, okay, they understand delivery times, they understand the quality expectations. Noted, we cannot share. We all know how English is, but that phrase meaning, about the non-disclosure aspect. So, ideally in person. If that's not an option, I would say phone call. And if not a phone call, then third would be email communication, and ask the factory to repeat back in written form and just to provide a little summary of their understanding of the contract or the agreement they're signing. That's why it's important, even to between you and me or any of my friends. Or no, I don't do this with my friends, but in business, sometimes I do this with my friends, especially right now in the political discussions. Here's what I heard you say, and it is so important to repeat back what I thought I heard someone say. So, because my understanding can be different than what the intent was, or what the intent or what was said.
Yep.
And so that's why the discussion is important, because when you're going clause by clause in an agreement, a contract, side by side with the factory, and you say this is what it spells out, and and they don't understand, or why is that necessary, or ask questions about that, that's a really good dialogue. So, I mean, it's important that even written words can be have different meanings to different folks.
Yeah, and the thing is, when you do that, and then you start to hear parts that they don't understand, it kind of informs you how to speak about things moving forward and how to deal with certain situations in the future. Because then you go, well, maybe it's not. I see this all the time with my clients, is they'll send an email and the language that they're using in the email is like they're using colloquial terms that in their mind isn't a colloquial term, but it is like a Western phrase that, anybody in the US, Canada, maybe even Europe for that matter would understand. And then they're using it while speaking to a Chinese manufacturer, and the Chinese manufacturer goes, they completely interpret it in a different way. And, I think getting into the habit of, like what you said, kind of asking them to repeat to you what they understood from what you said, especially when it comes to contracts specifically, is super important.
Another example would be exclusivity. When you're side by side with somebody, you don't have to read the contract. You say, this clause says you will not sell my design to anybody else. Understood? I mean, you don't have to go by, read it, because legal
jargon
language,
yeah,
sometimes jargon can be confusing. So it's the simple terms, right? And just making sure that that's why in person is good, because the legal jargon can be such a play on words. Sometimes it's hard to understand. So I'm a big proponent of that. And then also a point I wanted to make was that the agreement that is signed with the factory should include the ability to add addendums or appendix to it at such point. And I'll give you an example. I have a customer who started selling on Amazon, and now they are selling to a small retailer here in my state, and they needed to add a conflict of minerals appendix to their sales agreement. And that simply can be done simply if you just have an appendix that can be added to a contract, and so they would never have thought of doing that to begin with. Nobody cares about some of the social accountability or conflict minerals or chain of custody, other things that when you are first starting out in business don't seem to have much concern. And maybe rightfully so. I'm not going to make a personal judgment on that, but it's things that need to be aware of. And if you have an idea where you want to grow your business, and someday it's more than just selling online via one or two outlets, then you should also look at factories in a different light at the very beginning.
That is a good point. I know, Andy, you have to head out soon, right? So just
I have 15 minutes or so.
15 minutes, sure. Just in
if you want, I mean, it's up to you. I mean, are you going to talk to Mike and then interject between the two of us? There won't be any back and forth with me and Mike, but is your idea on the podcast to ask him some questions and then splice it all together?
No, that's gonna be. I'm too amateurish for that. I still need another year of doing this. Like I'm getting to a stage now. Now that I'm outsourcing the editing, I can be a little bit more creative with it. But like, I do want to get to a stage where I could do things like that. But it does take a long time. I think that would require more resources than I have at this moment in time. But I mean, going back to that, like, I think that we discussed this before. This is kind of off topic, but I'd love to have you on, more often, and then we can have debates about, other topics besides contracts and stuff.
Well, and absolutely. And it just so happens the last month, we're Chinese New Year.
Mm-hmm.
I took a few days off, and then I was at a conference at the same time every year. So, this next, my availability is not such as it has been the last 2 weeks, so I apologize for all that. But definitely, I'd love to be, on calls or topics where I can add value and share my knowledge or my opinion. So.
I guess, just in closing, I guess we can summarize our opinions on contracts, and then I'd love to, talk about your company a little bit, and then I've got a few closing questions that I always ask people.
Okay, absolutely. So my in summary, executing contracts, sales agreements with factories is important on several fronts. First, it shows the legitimacy and professionalism in dealing with the factory. It's not you're not being overstating your size or capabilities or your order volume. You're showing them you're serious. So contracts from the very beginning establish that your inquiry is serious. Second, they set the expectations. They allow you the opportunity to sit down or have a phone call or a discussion with the factory over what your expectations are and what they're committing to. And that is cost, delivery, quality, and lead times. So very important from that aspect. Third, and fortunately, and I'm going to knock on wood here, is that they provide a mechanism for recourse when something goes wrong. Hopefully that's just issues such as missing a ship window that can be easily rectified, in most cases shipping out a few days later or a week later. But if the problems ever come up with a recall or severe quality issues, then the service agreement contract that was executed with the factory can detail out how that is handled. And quality is one of those things that sometimes gets overlooked in the sales agreement and is vital as well. So in summary, the three areas that contracts represent for me and my clients in dealing with factories are legitimacy, professionalism, expectations, and recourse.
Mm-hmm. Before I go into my summary, do you think that to a certain extent, because you are in quality control and that's your expertise, do you think that plays a fact into how how you view contracts versus, let's say, somebody that's been a sourcing agent for 10 years?
I certainly think that my experience and my background have an influence in contracts versus somebody coming from sourcing, but I don't think that's good or bad. I think that one aspect that influences my opinion about the use of contracts is documentation. Document everything, have processes in place, and I view a contract as being one of those. I look in sometimes the quality things that need to be included can be done in an appendix to the contract. But I certainly, my experience and background influence my view on most things.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that in terms of I just know that I interviewed Renault, who runs a sourcing a QC company, a while ago, and just certain conversations I've had with you, I've noticed that when you're in the QC inspection business, I just feel like there's a certain level of attention to detail that is beyond. Even I think I'm a detail orientated person, but when I talk to you and I talk to other people in QC, it's just a little bit extra. So I was thinking about that.
Certainly, and that's why I think the contracts have to be very detailed. So I think how I got into this business has influenced what I feel should be in a contract. And I mean, certainly, in many aspects, I like looser is better, or more vague, because then that's a whole different. It allows you some leeway. And so if things are detailed too much, that may not necessarily be good for the supplier either, i.e., for example, payment terms. If a contract says payment terms are going to be due upon past inspection, and the buying entity wants to move to longer terms, or is, for whatever reason, wants to delay payment, and it's not, that scenario isn't specified in the contract, and that can lead to issues. And so it's a two-way street. This isn't all about, and I never want to imply this is taking advantage of a factory. It's setting expectations, and those expectations are two-way streets. The supplier expects that the buyer is going to do certain things and fulfill their obligations to the contract as well. So expectations are a two-way street.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, I guess I agree with you a lot, and I talk about that in articles. I feel the same way. I feel that it sets expectations. It puts your best foot forward. I think it's extremely important whether your order is worth $1,000 or it's worth $100,000. And I feel like people are impatient a lot of times, so that's why they think that, hey, I'm just gonna go based on a handshake or based on an invoice. And it can save you a lot of issues moving forward. But at the same time, it is more of a, when it does get breached, that is more of a negotiation now. And you're going back to the contract and saying, all right, we expected the product to be completed by this date. It's going to be done a week later. What are you going to do for us? And most of the time, most factories will be understanding and say, well, we'll add a few extra cartons of the product, or on the next order we'll give you a credit. And that's building the relationship, because they're saying on the next order, meaning you're going to be working with us for a while, we'll give you some sort of compensation. And I feel like that's the way people should approach contracts, is like be as diligent as possible, but also be as realistic as possible, in the sense that this is not going to be something that you can enforce. It might not be worth enforcing unless you are Michael Jordan brand and you're able to get your name back in China, and with billions of dollars behind you. So yeah, I mean, I think Andy summed up everything else pretty well. Andy, so I know this podcast wasn't necessarily like interviewing you, but I think that people might be curious. I will talk about you in the intro, but just can you give a little bit of background and just a brief background on how you joined EC, and I guess how we met?
Well, I've been doing business in China for 15 years. I lived in China 12 of those 15 years. Started off in the quality arena, working for a U.S.-based third-party testing lab and inspection and audit service provider, and then went out on my own 3 years ago and opening up a quality and sourcing agency. We primarily work with U.S. Western-based companies who are manufacturing private branded products for retailers. They don't have their own presence in Asia. So we're boots on the ground in country. Most of our work is in China, but we do work in Vietnam, Thailand, and India as well. And we work with companies of all sizes, and work with entrepreneurs and small business people who are selling online, people who are just have a napkin idea, sketched an idea on a napkin. We're doing some prototype development. So we are a sourcing agency from prototype all the way through shipment.
Okay. And one question I like to ask people is just, what do you think is the smallest thing you've done in your business that's brought you the largest results?
I missed the last. That brought what? Positive results?
What is the smallest thing you've done in your business that's brought you the largest results?
The largest result, the largest ROI. Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a great question. I'd say a couple things, and it's because I just came back from a conference this week,
Mm-hmm.
and you alluded it to earlier because of my quality background, is the attention to detail. That detail could be misspelling somebody's name at the factory that you're dealing with. The Chinese often take a Western name that sometimes is a unique spelling on a mainstream name, John with two N's or something like that. So sometimes the attention to detail and the people that you're interacting with, because your contact at the factory is the gateway to getting, your gatekeeper at the factory, dealing with production, quality, visiting the factory. So, getting the details right with that person. And on the flip side, your customers, understanding, the things that are important to them in their personal life as you develop a relationship, their spouse's names, their child's names, or when their birthday is. So sometimes non-business things, details, can make all the difference in your business. So, to me, that's something that takes very little time. It shows you care, and it can make a world of difference on both sides of your the upstream and downstream of your business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we talked about that as well. It's just like at the Inter-China event that we had, and I was talking about sending maple syrup to suppliers for Chinese New Year. And it's just something a little bit different, and it shows that you're acknowledging their culture, and then at the same time bringing a little bit of your culture into play, and it can go a long way.
I have a suggestion for you. If you ask that question at the end of every year podcast, or certain, maybe not repeat guests, I bet that alone would be a great segment, piecing all those together when you figure out how to do splicing.
A great Sorry, could you say that again?
When you get to the point where you can splice from different interviews,
yeah,
asking all the answers to that question about what's the smallest
thing you've done, the Pareto principle,
that's had the biggest return or impact, I think would be fascinating. And that's like or something. If I could, right? If I could,
it's the Pareto's principle, 80-20 principle, which is that 20% of what you do will bring 80% of your results. Right. And then 80.
During the day today, I'll probably think of numerous other things.
Yeah.
And depending on where you are in your workday or how your week has been, and for me, that came about because I just came back from a conference for people I haven't seen in a year, and I had a conversation last year with a potential client or a lead, met with them, and this year I remember the guy's wife's name and his kid's name from a year ago. And, that led to, okay, well, we're ready to deal with you. All right, well, that probably didn't happen because I remembered his wife's name and his kid's name 15 minutes earlier and we were talking, but it certainly, didn't hurt. So, anyway.
It does, and I talk about that. I try to enforce that with my staff and just the company culture is just like, write everything down, take notes. I know it's boring, but it helps. It helps in the future because you're trying to keep so much information in your brain. If you can try to if you can try to remember as many details as possible, it's always going to be beneficial for you. And I think it makes the difference between an okay business versus a really great business, or somebody who does okay in their job versus somebody who does amazing in their job is that extra 10% or whatever that you remember. Yeah, I know. I have to give credit to Tim Ferriss for that question because I'm a big fan of Tim Ferriss's podcast, and he asked that question from time to time, and then I just kind of took it and had incorporated it into my my podcast questions. Final questions would be: if there were 3 books that you could recommend, either 3 books, 3 podcasts, or 3 books, 3 podcasts, or 3 movies for that matter, that you would recommend somebody watch, listen to, or read, to get to know you better, what would they be?
Wow, that's a good 3. Okay. Good to Great by Jim Collins is an excellent book on life company.
I love that book. Why am I not surprised that you read that book? I love that book. I just read that 4 months ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I read that. I don't know, many years, maybe 10 or more years ago. I don't know when it came out, and it's actually one of these books I like to read again. I think it's probably been out about 15 years or so. But Good to Great business book. I think that Harlan Corbin, also a book. It's important that not everything in your life revolves around work, and so having another author, if you like to read, and for me, so anything by Harlan Corbin, because that balances out, kind of takes me away when you're traveling or whatnot. So anything by Harlan Corbin is the second book, and then. Since you said get to know me, I'm talking to it's golf. Learn to golf, play golf, watch golf, sports. Anything to do with sports, I enjoy watching. I'm not a sports junkie, although I enjoy watching stuff. So those three, Good to Great, Harlan Corbin, and sports.
Sports, all right, good. Is there? I guess that's it. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on that we didn't say, or anything else that you wanted to leave the people with? And how can people reach you as well?
One last thing about contract, and also I guess this goes to your comment earlier or question or trading address is how I got involved in Enter China, and it's because of a mutual friend of ours, Mike McElhaney, who got involved with you in Enter China, and how great of a resource it is for the buying community. And while it's geared toward smaller, and people who are selling on Amazon or maybe the smaller guy, the resources out there are amazing. So don't ever think you can't afford a contract when resources exist on, as you said earlier, on Enter China. People in the community are willing to share their knowledge and information. So it is important to know that I can't afford it is not a good excuse. I mean, that's just an excuse, and I hear that so many times with different things. And for a contract, that applies. Legal work, you go to get you want to go to, the big firms, you're going to have to pay big money, but that shouldn't preclude you from having a contract in place with your suppliers, because there's resources out there that are available that can provide you contracts at minimal cost.
Totally agree. And I mean, for example, you can get a contract template for free through Enter China. I know there are other sourcing companies such as mine. Well, my contract is the one on Enter China, but like there are other sourcing companies and other manufacturing companies that provide templates at either a really low cost or for free. So I don't think there's any excuse in terms of not being able to get some sort of agreement in place. And these days there's so many resources, as you pointed out, whether it's Enter China or other podcasts or, blogs and stuff that tell you what to do. And these are people that are in China and have these experiences and are not that far ahead of you. And I get surprised actually when I have certain clients who are maybe fans of Enter China, or a few clients that are maybe members who are not necessarily following all the tenets that we talk about. But yeah.
So that would be one of my takeaways.
Mm-hmm.
You're not too small and not too cheap to get a contract.
Mm-hmm. All right, Andy. Really appreciate you being on the podcast. If people want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
Online, insight-quality.com is our website, and there's my contact information, and way to get a hold of me is on there. My email is Andy, ANDY.church, CHURCH, at insight, INSIGHT-quality, QUALITY.com. I sure appreciate your time, Rico. I got a WeChat from Mike while we were talking, so maybe he was sharing a tidbit about contracts with me that we'll have to include next time.
All right. Yeah, we'll definitely have more opportunities to be on the podcast, and once we maybe set up some sort of flow. But yeah, guys, if you want to reach out to us, you can contact us at info@sourcefinancial.com. And of course, you can go to the website sourcefinasia.com/made-in-China if you want to listen to old episodes. Of course, the resources that Andy mentioned as well, the books that he's read, some of the other things that we talked about in the podcast will be there on the website for you guys to review. All right, cheers.
All my friends are heathens, take it slow. Wait for them to ask you who you know.
What's up, YouTube? Thanks for watching the video. If you like this kind of content, I have a special gift for you. It's called the Definitive Sourcing Guide Arsenal. It's our 4-step sourcing guide. The link is in the description below. Of course, we also have the Made in China podcast at sourcefinasia.com/made-in-china. Link is in the description below. And of course, subscribe.